Continue with our mental prayer Mondays. And so far we talked about the first two rules out of 14. Rule number 1 being when a person is moving away from God, how does the good spirit and the evil spirit act on such a person? And then when a person is moving toward God. And we could summarize these two rules as follows. If I can find this. Here it is. Right? If a person is moving away from God, the enemy encourages and the good spirit troubles. And if the person is moving toward God, the enemy troubles and the good spirit encourages. And so from this point on, although the rules kind of presume that a person is trying to move toward God, and so they basically just try to flush out, how does the enemy try to discourage and trouble a person moving towards God? And how does the good spirit try to encourage, right, a person in this that's moving towards God? So all the other rules kind of have to do with this, understanding how the evil one discourages and the good spirit encourages. And so let's jump to the third rule, and let me just kind of read it here for you. Third rule. The third is of spiritual consolation. I call it consolation when some interior movement is caused in the soul, through which the soul comes to be inflamed with love of its Creator and Lord, and consequently, when it can love no created thing on the face of the earth in itself, but only in the Creator of them all. Likewise, when it sheds tears that move to love of its Lord, whether out of sorrow for one's sins, or for the passion of Christ our Lord, or because of other things directly ordered to His service and praise. Finally, I call consolation every increase of hope, faith, and charity, and all interior joy that calls and attracts to heavenly things, and to the salvation of one's soul, quieting it, and giving it peace in its Creator and Lord. So that's a long text for the third rule, a lot to say. But we can just kind of start at the beginning. It says, the third is of spiritual consolation. And so here an important element is this modifier to the word consolation, the word spiritual, right? So we're not just talking about a consolation in general, but we're talking about spiritual consolation. And so usually we understand a consolation just without the modifier spiritual to be an elevation of heart, right, that we experience inside of us. Yeah, an uplifting of the heart which instills joy and gives us peace, right? This is just a consolation, right? But Ignatius adds a modifier, spiritual, right? So it has to be, right, an inner uplifting of the heart that instills joys and peace, but that it also directly impacts our life of faith and our following of God's will. So if it's just a uplifting of the heart that gives us joy and peace, it's just a consolation, but for it to become a spiritual consolation, it somehow has to directly impact our life of faith and our following of God's will. So I can give you maybe just to finish today 4 examples of non-spiritual consolations, of consolations that do not fall in this category. For example, you can spend some time in nature and just be moved by the beauty of nature and kind of have this sense of peace and the grandeur of creation. A great thing. But it's not necessarily like impacting your life of faith, so it's a consolation, but it is not a spiritual consolation. Let me give you 3 more examples. Maybe the experience or the stirrings of the heart that we can feel when we listen to beautiful music or a beautiful piece of art, or the sense of kind of peace and joy we can have after an enjoyable time with family and friends after some good conversations. Or maybe the sense of physical well-being and energy after a kind of good session of exercise. All these are consolations. They're good, and they're gifts from God that we are meant to enjoy. But because they're not having a direct and immediate reference to a life of faith, right, then they're good, they're consolations, but they are non-spiritual consolations. They will not fall in the category of the third rule because Ignatius is talking specifically about spiritual consolations. And so we'll pick up next Monday, more like, okay, well, if these are non-spiritual, then like, where do the spiritual consolations come in?